Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon, and I hope you're all excited and getting ready to relax during this long weekend if you are in the United States. I do want to say a big hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone joining me live here on Behance. If you're on YouTube, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so you can chat along. And I can see all of your amazing faces. We've got Adil and Agnes, Philip and Ronak, Juhi, Kevin, Laura, Julia, Irving, Paul, Minty, Aubrey, Jack. Welcome, everyone. Glad to see all of you here. If you're tuning in live, let me know who you are in the chat and where you're tuning in from. I do see we've got Philip from Germany, Julia from Germany, Irving from New Orleans. Definitely let me know in the chat. All right, so another week, another masterclass, and if you're new to these, this is how it works. It's more of a deep dive into Adobe XD. You know, we do the daily challenges basically every single day, and then I try to take these masterclasses and really go a little bit deeper into some of the designs and philosophy and that sort of thing, and some of it is from suggestions from the community, all of you. I take a look at your messages in Discord and your tweets and your chat over here to the left, and I try to figure out how to incorporate some of that stuff. And some of you have asked, how do I import my Illustrator files into Adobe XD, and what can I do with them after that? So today we're going to get a little bit fun. It's going to be a little bit fancy. It is Fancy Friday. So without further ado, I'm going to hop over to my screen. And before we dive into designing, I want to remind all of you that Adobe Max is coming up very soon, October 20th to the 22nd. That's in a month. That's next month. A little over a month, but it's next month. I'm super excited. We've got some really cool stuff coming up. We have some fun secrets that we're holding on to. In fact, I may have some of those secrets in this little book. So we got some cool stuff coming. Obviously, a lot of new Adobe XD features, and we also have a ton of Adobe XD sessions and talks. So definitely go to max.adobe.com, register. I'm in here somewhere. I'm running 2 sessions, one for beginners, one for advanced users, but it's going to be a really good time. Uma Korn from Netherlands, Jay Swanson from Portland. We've got Jalal from Iran, and we've got Jay Swanson, Mallory. Welcome, everyone. Great to see all of you. The Doctor Who Journal, indeed. It's where I keep all of my fun secrets. All right. So over here on dribble.com/Pinsky, I did post, I also posted on Instagram and Twitter, but I also posted on Dribble this fun little design that we're going to be creating today. And we're going to start that creating process but from an Adobe Illustrator file. And as you can see here, kind of transitions from nighttime or dusk to daytime. There's a little bit of a number counter. There's a notification in there. It's going to be fun. So let's go ahead and hop over to there. Let me just go ahead and minimize this. And here's Adobe XD, but we're actually not going to start in Adobe XD. We're going to start in Finder. You can also start directly in Illustrator if you want, but I did grab this particular Illustrator file from Adobe Stock. And this is just a regular old Illustrator file, created in Illustrator, just saved as an AI file. You don't have to do anything special to it. All of your Illustrator files will open directly in XD. So what you can do, you can either drag it onto your dock, or you can right click, go to Open With, and then Adobe XD. I've also got some secrets in these builds over here, but maybe I'll save that for another day. So I'm gonna go ahead and open Adobe XD, and here we go. XD is loading, and right now it's taking all those Illustrator files, all the layers, all the groups, all the everything, and we are going, and it just imports them. Philip says, how about the masterclass where you're not prepared? Soon. I want to tackle a few additional things first, but that's going to be a really fun one. So if you're not familiar, if you didn't catch, I think I talked about it last week or the week after, I want to do a masterclass in the near future, maybe next week, or the week after, I don't know, sometime in September. Definitely September, hold me to that, where I come completely unprepared. Usually I have an idea in mind, sometimes I have a design over here to the left on my other monitor, but I want to come in here and just leave it up to all of you. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun. So you can see the process that goes through, coming up with the idea, coming up with the design, resources, inspiration, that sort of thing. But that's for another day. All right, so it's gone ahead and imported basically everything from this Illustrator file. I can double click, you can see we've got our group over here to the left-hand side, and I can just dive in here. There's a mask, there's some layers, there's some groups, and of course, because this is an Illustrator file, there's a ton of different paths. Hey Megan, welcome. 5 minutes late, not a problem. We haven't actually done anything. I just talked for a little bit. So, okay, so here we go. What we're gonna do is we're gonna start with this particular design. We may do a few of them, possibly if we have time, but I do wanna use this one here. This camping one. I don't probably need the text, so I'm actually going to just delete the text. Don't need it right now. But I'm gonna dive in and I'm going to grab this group here. I can go ahead and just name this hiking just so I know which one is which. And I want to start the process of creating these transitions that go from night to day, right? So I'm gonna grab my artboard tool, and just so we can start nice and large, I'll just do a 1280 by 720 or 1280 by 800 pixel artboard. It's usually for the web, but you can use it for other things if you want. If you're designing for Dribbble, video for Dribbble, it's 1200 by 900 you want to export it as. And if you're designing just a static image, you can do 1600 by 1200, I believe. All right, so I'm gonna grab this hiking group, copy it, and paste it. And because it was an Illustrator file, it's completely vector, I can just go ahead and very easily enlarge it basically as big or as small as I want, and the quality will not be affected, which is fantastic. Definitely one of the big benefits of using vector images or designs, right? All right, so we've got this illustration looking great, and there are a few things we want to do to it before we actually make that transition from night to day. We obviously want to define what the night version looks like, right? So I'm going to dive into these groups in this mask, and there is one actually called glow, and this is basically this layer group here, right? And there's a bunch of different layers inside of it. So there's one thing I want to do to this one is basically just move this up a little bit, because I'm envisioning on the next artboard, when the transition is taking place, this glow layer is kind of coming down from the top, right? So it looks like there's a little bit of motion in there. Now, of course, you might be thinking, well, doesn't the sun rise? It does, but sometimes the actual glare, this isn't necessarily the sun, it's more of a glow. Sometimes the glows can actually go in different directions, depending on lots of different things. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know how to explain that properly. And then of course I want to decrease the opacity to 0, because this is going to be, again, the night version first, then it's going to transition into day. So for this one, what I can do now is I can actually just duplicate this, Command or Control D, and in my layers panel, I'm going to name this night, just like that. Now, one thing I could do is I could dive in here to these 4 layers, and of course, depending on the design you're working with, it might be a lot more layers, but this one has 4, and each of them have a little bit of a different gradient, and it goes from like a dark yellow. If I take a look at this, and it's just there's a ton of stops, right? I don't really want to go through each and every one of those layers and modify it for the night version, right? So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and just draw a rectangle across this entire group, right? I also want to make sure to bump the opacity back up to 100%. Now, obviously, that doesn't really look like much, right? So 2 things we can do to start making this look interesting. Selecting the parent group, I'm going to go ahead and change the blend mode from pass through. We'll just experiment with a few of them. Let's try overlay. And because I want more of a dusky look on this rectangle that I created up here, I may want to change the color to a purple. Just like that. And look at that. All of a sudden, that's looking pretty fancy, right? And depending on the situation or the scene, I can always go through and make some changes to that. Or I can go ahead and tweak the blend mode. So overlay looks pretty good. Soft light, ooh, that's interesting. Soft light looks okay. There's hard light. There's color. Interesting. I think overlay might be the one. Let's just go ahead and make some changes to the color a little bit. I'll make it a little bit more purple. Let's see what soft light looks like again. It kind of has like this washed out feel to it. It's kind of interesting, right? Multiply. Okay. I think we can, I think that could work. All right. So again, we have our night version, right? And then we have our day version eventually, right? So I'm going to go ahead back to night, turn this back up. I can also move these layers a little bit so I can get a bit of a different feel. Can't see too much, but there is a little bit of a different feel there. All right, just double checking my blend modes. We've got our rectangle up here. I can also play around with this opacity as well. And all of a sudden you're getting a little bit more of a different look, right? And you can just go ahead and, I know Philip says never use blend modes, maybe I have to start seeing this. Yeah, it's interesting. Once you start kind of figuring out what each blend mode does, so light colors are pretty good with overlay and soft light. There's whole mathematical formulas behind them that I won't get into today, but as you start playing with them and figuring them out, you can do a lot with them. I can also play around. So this could be multiply, for example, and then this one could be maybe soft light. And that's kind of definitely more of a darker feel to it, this. But you may want that, right? I'm going to go ahead and make these a little bit larger, and you can see all those paths going around this document. Let's go ahead and try... Color burn might be too much. Yeah, that's way too much. Overlay. That's interesting, actually. So overlay on this one, and then... I kind of like this one, because it allows you to see the mountains just a little bit more, right? All right, so we've got our first artboard looking pretty good, and now we want to start making that transition to the second. So I'm going to go ahead and select the entire artboard just by clicking on the label at the top, and I'm going to duplicate, Command and Control D, pop that over here, and now I can start making changes to this artboard for the day version of this design. So back into these groups and the masks and all these fun things, I've got the night layer selected, or the group I should say. I'm just gonna bring that opacity down to 0. And then if I select the glow layer, I'm gonna bring the opacity back up to 100% and just shift this down a little bit, right? There we go. So we have our two states ready to go. We've got on the left, we have our night version, right? Or some more of a dusky version. And then on the right, we have our day version with this glow that we've moved down the artboard a little bit. So how do we actually go ahead and wire this thing up? What I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into prototype mode. I'm going to select the entire artboard. And this will allow me to drag a handle from the right to the second artboard over here. And because I had the entire artboard selected and not an individual object, I can go ahead and choose the time trigger from the top right within the properties inspector, right? And this will let me kick off this animation after a certain delay. So I can go ahead and choose, let's say 0.6 seconds. So there's a little bit of a delay at the beginning, and then it'll kick off whatever that transition type is. And in this case, we don't want a transition because that'll just fade. We do want auto animate. And if you've never used Adobe XD before, or if you have and you don't have experience with auto animate, essentially what's happening is XD is going to look at the differences between the two artboards and animate any changes across like layers. And I'll explain a little bit about what like layers means in a second. So we've got auto animate selected. We can choose some easing options. Probably in and out is probably your best bet for this situation. And then a duration will really crank this up to about 5 seconds. So we have a nice long transition, right? All right, so with the first artboard selected, I'm simply going to press the play button at the top. Ooh, look at that. So do you see that transition going on? Let me go ahead and I'm gonna adjust the delay. I'm gonna drop that down to about 0.2, and then let's actually drop the duration down just a few seconds. Right? I do like it with the 5 seconds though. Philip's saying, why is time trigger only available on the artboard level? So eventually, hopefully, once more animation features come out, that might extend to things like states and individual objects. But if you think about it, right, after a time trigger takes place, it basically goes to another artboard, right? So if you had one artboard and you were able to do it or set time triggers on individual objects, only the first one would really kick off until we enable that on states, like for micro interactions, right? But that's not available just yet. But so if you had a time trigger from one artboard to another, there would really only be room for one. Once the first time trigger kicks off, then the second one would not kick off because it's on the other artboard, if that makes any sense. But once we have that available on states for micro interactions, then it might make sense to allow them on individual objects. All right, so one more time just to show you. Transitions from this dusky look down to this kind of glowy daytime version. Now we can also make some changes to the glowy version if we wanted to, right? We can dive in here, and just like we did for the night version, we can add maybe a rectangle, maybe play around with the opacity or the blend modes. That's probably a little bit too much. It kind of has an interesting feel to it, but probably not. That one's kind of washed out. It's interesting. I can add in some color here, right? And if we take a look at what that looks like, it just adds a little bit more glow to this overall feel of this design, right? Let's try overlay. Ooh, oh, that's interesting. Look how that blend mode on this layer interacts with that glow. It almost makes it look like some sort of a fun lens blur. Do you like that? I don't know. I kind of like it. That's probably a bit too much. I'm kind of digging that. Let's see what that looks like, right? I'm gonna just name this glow blend. I don't know what that means, but we'll do it, right? Cornell says timeline should resolve the time trigger problem. Yeah, it absolutely would. I know the team is definitely exploring. They have been exploring for a while. Some sort of what a timeline or some sort of animation feature could look like in Adobe XD, or advanced animation feature, I should say. They want to make sure to get it right. We don't want to just throw in something that looks like After Effects into Adobe XD, because that's very clunky. It's a great application, but it's a little bit too much for a UI and UX designer. So they want to make sure to get a timeline right before they release anything. All right, so we've got this set. I'm going to copy this one, and I'm going to paste it into the glow layer on the first artboard. And this goes back to what I was talking about like layers. If this group here did not exist on this first artboard, XD wouldn't really know what to do with it on the second artboard, right? Because it wouldn't exist. So it would just kind of fade it in. And even though in this case we do want to fade in, if it was like an animated path or layers or whatever it might be, then you might run into some issues. All right, so we've got that. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like now. Ooh, interesting. Interesting. I wonder what would happen. I'm just experimenting now because it's fun, right? What if I rotated these layers? Would that? Ooh, look at that. Okay, it's moving now. It's almost looks like Saturn. So now let's see one more time. I love experimenting live on air. Interesting, right? Now, what if which layer is this one here? This is the one that's really interacting. Maybe I will stretch it out a little bit more. So we get like almost like this lens flare again, right? One more time. Interesting. I don't know about the rotation though, but we do have that kind of elongation of this glow, which is kind of fun. All right, so we've essentially accomplished this, right? We've got our night version, we've got our day version, things are looking pretty good. But now we may want to actually start incorporating this into more of a real world design. And as I showed off on Dribbble a little bit ago, it's more of like a lock screen, a dynamic lock screen that changes throughout the day. So let me show you how we can set that up. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my artboard tool, and I am going to choose, let's go big, iPhone XR, XS, Max 11. A lot of different numbers in there. But I'm gonna bring this over here, and we're essentially gonna do the same thing, right? So I'm gonna grab this entire group. I could actually just copy it by holding down Alt-Option and dragging it over. And I wanna make sure that this fills up the space really nicely. There we go. I can also dive in here. See, these boots are kind of right at the edge where this is in the center, which I like. So I may just want to dive in here and make changes. Let me find the boots layer. Let's see. Where would the boots be? No, I don't want the filter. Aha, group 17. It's gonna shift these over 20 pixels. All right, so that one looks good. I'm gonna duplicate this over, but I don't want the night version because I already have the day version. Of course, if I was just starting with the iPhone views, then I would definitely keep that on there, but I do already have the day version, so I'm gonna duplicate this in here. Bring this up. And then I wanna make sure again to modify these boots. Otherwise the boots would kind of move, which would kind of be interesting a little bit. But if I didn't move them, the boots would kind of shift over. It would look very strange. So I'm gonna grab group 17 and boop, boop. There we go. All right, so just like I did earlier, I wanna grab the handle within prototype mode, drag it on over to the right, and then I'll keep the same options here, right? So I do this, and there we go. Fancy. Now I may want to just kind of shift the glow a little bit on the second artboard because it is kind of lost out there. If I make sure I'm on the right artboard, I was not. All right, here we go. Grab glow, shift this over just a little bit. There we go. All right, one more time. Perfect. Okay, so now that that is set up, we want to start adding in a few different elements that might be present on the artboard or the phone, on your device, right? First thing we're all familiar with is that lovely home indicator at the bottom, or in this case, if it's a lock screen, it's the little thing that you just grab and you swipe up so that you can unlock your phone. And that's just down here with the line. Drag this out, change the color to white, and make this nice and thick. And also round out the caps and make sure this is positioned in the center. You can also, right here at the top right-hand corner of your interface, you can also use the alignment and distribution options and just press on that and it centers it. Hey everyone just joining. We've got Umar and Joe and Abdukar. Great to see all of you. All right. That looks okay. Maybe it's a little bit too thick. And I also want to just drop the opacity a touch. All right, so next thing we might want to add is, if you have an iPhone that's up to date, you have on the left-hand side, you have a button for the flashlight, and on the right-hand side, you have a button for the camera. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool right over here in the tools bar. You can also use shortcut key E and drag one out. I'm holding down my shift key to make sure to constrain this to a perfect circle. And let's see. I think that's a pretty good size. I'll pop this somewhere around, let's say 40 pixels from the left. Then I can duplicate one over here. Actually, before I do that, let me make sure the style is correct. Because if you take a look at your iPhone, it's not a pure white. Let me actually look at my iPhone now. Yeah, it's not a pure white look, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and maybe I'll turn on back. Nah, do we need a background blur? Probably not, right? I'll just do something like this. And maybe just drop the opacity a touch. Just a little bit. So you don't want to drop it too much, because then if you start adding icons on there, then it'll be a little bit difficult to see, but just a little bit. Now the reason I'm not adding a background blur, even though it'll probably give us a really interesting look, is because the more background blurs you add, especially when you're putting that with animation and things like that, you might see a little bit of performance, frame drop when you're previewing this thing. So I want to keep it as streamlined as possible, especially since I'm streaming and there's a lot going on my computer right now. So I'm going to keep the background blur off and just drop the opacity a little bit. There we go. And then I can duplicate this over to the right. Again, about 40 pixels from that side over there. That looks pretty good. Hey Aslam, welcome. I am feeling better, thank you. All right, so with these two in place, can you focus more on prototyping? We will get back to prototyping very shortly, actually, but I did cover it at the beginning with the transition, and then we're gonna do some designing, and then shortly, we're gonna get back into prototyping. Okay, so we want two icons, essentially. Let's go to the Icons for Design plugin, and the one on the left is a flashlight. That one looks pretty good, the iconic flashlight. Now, it is set to black by default, so I'm gonna just change the color to white and pop it right about there. And the one on the right, camera, let's go ahead and just choose I feel bad about choosing the material camera considering this is for iOS. So let's go ahead and choose the Metro camera. It's almost similar. And I'll pop, and I'll pop that over here. Make it a bit smaller. All right, that's looking pretty good. I think it's a little bit too large. Yeah, I think they're a little bit too large. So what I'm gonna make sure to do, one, make sure to group all these things. So I've got the camera icon selected. I'm gonna group, call this, or that's a flashlight. Flashlight, and then we've got our camera icon. Group those, Command and Control G, camera. There we go. And I'm just gonna make sure that both of these are the same size, but also a lot smaller. So let's try 45 pixels. Possibly, maybe 48. All right. That's 33. There's 40. Now this camera's a little bit too, it also got a bit squished. I'm just gonna bring this in a little bit. There we go. Make sure this is aligned, and the smart guides are helping me out, letting me know that everything is aligned perfectly. All right, so we've got the flashlight, we've got the camera, and up very, all the way at the top, there are a few other things we're gonna add. One, keeping on the line of icons, we might want a little bit of a lock icon, not lick, a lock icon to let us know if it's locked or not locked. Aubrey says, is there a keyboard shortcut to rename a layer after you group it? Not at the moment, but I hope that one day we will introduce that. But not at the moment, unfortunately. Oops. All right, so we've got a lock icon. I don't know if I like that. Do I like that lock icon? I don't really like that lock icon. It needs to be a little bit smoother. Let's try this one, even though this is the material icon. It is a nice icon though. All right, pop that right up there. And now right below, we want the time. We also want the date as well. So with the text tool, I'm gonna go ahead and type out, what time is it now? It's like 12:30 almost. Okay. And let's go ahead and I'm just going to have fun with the font. Even though it's not an official font for the iPhone, I'm going to have a little bit of fun with this. This is the Josephine font, or Josephine. Still don't know how to pronounce it, but that's what that is. A really nice looking font. And light. Light looks okay. Let's see what regular looks like. Bold? That might be a bit too bold. Semi-bold? I can just do this all day. Just go through different weights of this font. And I think regular could work. All right. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to duplicate this down, and we want to add the date. So this could be, what's the date today? Friday, September 4th. Bring this down quite a bit. And there we go. Now, one thing you might be noticing is it's a little bit difficult to read, right? We've got our white text on sort of a fairly light background, and especially once we transition to the day screen, it's gonna be even lighter. So what I wanna do, just to make sure that things are, people can read stuff, is just add a little bit of a shadow. And in this case, what we're gonna do is we're gonna set the blur to about 0. So it's a hard shadow. And then I'm gonna really just drop the opacity quite a bit, to about 10, let's say. And I can do the exact same thing for this layer here. Now, because this is a smaller shape, you may have to adjust your settings a little bit. Maybe I'll just bring this in just a touch more. All right, and you wanna keep that shadow very subtle. Okay, so one more thing before we move on to some additional prototyping and animation is this over here, this time, maybe during the transition, we want some sort of a number counter where, the actual number on the left kind of ticks up, or ticks down, I should say, right? So here's what we're gonna do for that. I'm actually going to delete this section here, and I'm just going to leave 30. And then on a separate text layer, I want to start by typing the numbers that, maybe this is starting at 4 in the morning, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and type 4. And then on a new line, I'm going to press return 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, and let's say 3 o'clock. Now you can't see all the ones that I typed, but here they all are. And I'm going to adjust the line height a little bit. There we go. I'm also going to make sure to right justify this text, right align this text. That way, if it was a left align, for example, and I lined up the 4, when it does get to the point where the 10 and the 11 and the 12, there's going to be a little bit squishy over there. So I'm going to make sure to right justify it like that. All right, and make sure this is in the center. Let me group this, center it, perfect. Let me actually visually group, there we go. Okay, much better. All right, so now obviously, we don't want the 5 and the 6 and the 7 and the 8 and all these different numbers to be displayed. So what we're going to have to do in this case is create a mask so that only the numbers that are inside this shape will be visible. I'm going to go ahead and grab my rectangle tool and draw a rectangle over top of not just the number, but also more over to the left as well. That way when the longer numbers come in, like the 12 and I was going to say 13, but there's no 13 unless you're on 24-hour time. But like the 10, 11, and 12, right? So just have a little bit more room over there. And I'm going to call this mask so we know what we're looking at. All right, so I've got my mask selected right here at the top, and I also have this text layer. I want to make sure, not this one here, but the time. I want to make sure to select the mask and also the individual numbers that we created, just like that. I'm holding down my Command or Control key and clicking on the second one, or if you have a bunch of them in order, you can also hold down your Shift key. So under the Object menu, I'm going to mask with shape. And like I mentioned earlier, it's only going to show the elements that are inside of this rectangle that we created. As you can see, everything else underneath it just disappeared, which is exactly what we want. All right, so now what we're going to do, just to kind of do some housekeeping here, I want to make sure that all of these new elements that we created are also on the second artboard so that XD knows what to do with them, right? Again, if I just preview, things are just going to fade away because they're not over there, right? So I'm going to select all this information here, copy it, and paste it. There we go. So now we have this information. You can kind of see the importance of that very subtle drop shadow on the time. If it was not there, the text would be a little bit more difficult to read, right? All right. So Rizwan is saying, I believe everyone here is not starting from level 0. Everyone has basic knowledge. Can you be I think he's saying a little bit slower. So like I explained at the beginning of this masterclass, these specific classes on Friday are meant to go a little bit deeper into Adobe XD than the regular classes. Monday to Friday, every day at 2:30 Pacific or 2 o'clock Pacific time, we have our daily challenges, which are meant for beginners. So this one's definitely a little bit more advanced. But check out the daily challenges as well. You can also go to behance.net/challenge/XD to catch up on older ones, which are definitely meant for beginners. All right, so we've got essentially everything on both artboards, right? So one more time, if I play this, the transition happens and all those elements remain in place, which is exactly what we want. But we do want to get a little bit fancy and adjust the numbers so that there's that ticker going on, right? So to do that, I'm going to dive in here, dive into the mask, dive into the numbers, and just move them on up. And let's pop the 3 in there. Make sure it lines up with the other 3. And if I'm not too sure, I can go ahead and grab a guide from the top of my artboard, drag this down. Whoops. Ooh, that lined up perfectly, actually. Fancy. All right. So that looks pretty good. And now all we need to do is press play one more time. And look at that ticker go. It's pretty good, pretty fancy. All right. one more thing I want to add in addition to this is maybe some sort of a notification that displays maybe time to wake up or something to that effect, right? So let's go ahead, just like we did on this artboard, just like we did with the other elements, let's just design it on one of them right now, and then we'll transfer it over to the other one. So I'm going to grab my good old rectangle tool. Let me bring this out just like this, just so I know that everything's going to line up perfectly. All right, so this is going to be the housing for this particular notification. I'm going to round out the corners just a little bit. Let's try 8 pixels. That might be a little bit too little, but we'll see what that looks like. Now, maybe for this particular element, because it's so large and because it will be animating, we may want to introduce a little bit of a background blur. I was telling you earlier that you probably don't want background blurs on things like these little tiny elements that you're probably not even going to notice, because it may slow down a little bit. But this one, it's a larger element, you're going to notice it, so let's try it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn background blur on. Now, that's pretty interesting, right? Let's darken it a touch. Maybe, I want to keep it dark, right? So if it's like this, it looks kind of fun, but adding elements on top of this, because there's such a color difference, it's gonna be a little bit difficult. So I wanna make sure just to go on the darker side. Just so it's a subtle background blur. There we go. Okay, we'll start with that, and we can always tweak it a little bit later on if we need to. Now on the inside, we may want an icon, and this could be for the icon of the application that is notifying you of something, right? So I'm gonna just drag one out like this. Make sure it's centered. Make sure it is, there we go. Perfect. I'm just holding down my Alt or Option key and just hovering over different elements to let me know, XD will let me know, it's 12 pixels from the top, 12, 12, and 12. You can also use padding as well, which we'll get into a little bit later. I'm gonna round out these corners a little bit less. Yeah, I might wanna change this one. Let's try 16 pixels. And then this one, 8 looks pretty good. All right, perfect. Anahit is saying, is there a site you recommend for free stock illustrations? Adobe stock is awesome, but expensive. Yeah, it can be. I mean, licensing, you're obviously covering yourself for copyright and that sort of thing. I don't know off the top of my head. I know Unsplash for photos, but I don't know for illustrations. Maybe someone in the chat knows and they can throw it in there. All right, so we've got the icon. Looking pretty good. It is looking a little bit large. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it does look a little bit large, so maybe I'm going to shrink it down a touch more, just to really inset it like this. We'll try that. We'll see what that looks like. Now, over here, we might want to put some sort of, maybe a title, maybe who the app is, possibly. Or I guess to say what the app is, and then of course a little bit of description right underneath it. Hey Kyle, welcome. By the way, stick around after this masterclass. Kyle's coming up with just illustration things that will just blow your mind. Very talented guy, obviously, but I can never do any of that stuff. But stick around for that. All right, so here we're just gonna type in, let's say, wakey wakey. And if autocorrect would just stop autocorrecting on me, that would be great. Let's bump this up to about semi-bold, and I'm gonna left align it. Now, I talk about this a lot in my voice is not heard. Oh, maybe, so if you can't hear, I don't know why I'm saying this if you can't hear my voice, but there's a button down that way that might, it's either up there or down there, that you'll be able to unmute. Someone type that in the chat for Karen. All right, so, I talk about this a lot, right? Often as designers, we find ourselves, and digital illustrators as well, I know Kyle can probably talk to this as well, but we find ourselves zooming in a lot. Like, I love designing very close and tight like this, so I can see all the little details and make sure everything is pixel perfect. But when you're so zoomed in, it's hard to really see the perspective of everything else. So you might have elements that are way too big or way too small. They might look nice at this level, but you always want to kind of take a step back and just zoom on out, right? And I'm noticing that's small text. That is way too small. Of course, I could have looked over to the properties inspector at the point, but it looks okay here, right? Just zoom. Hit your M key to unmute. Yeah, Okay, everyone's helping him out. Good. As long as it's not me, we're all good. So I'm gonna just bump this up. Let's see what 16 looks like. That's okay. That could work. Let's bump this up to bold. And then right underneath, we want a little bit of a description or some sort of notification to let you know, you should probably get out of your little tent. So I'm gonna drag out an area text just like this, and let's start typing something out. There we go. All right, now obviously this is way too large. We want to definitely shrink down this text quite a bit. So over here to the right, let's go ahead and see what 10 might be too small. Yeah, it's a bit too small. Let's try 12. And then we probably don't want to go with the same bold weight. We want to reserve that for the title. And I'm going to drop this to, let's see what regular looks like. That's not bad. Semi-bold. All right, that could work. And I'm just gonna pop this in just a little bit so that the word sleep kind of bumps down to that second line, because what I do wanna do is also have an area over here. This isn't necessarily present on iOS, but you can kind of do something similar where you can swipe over. I just want some sort of an indicator that there's a menu or there are other options over there. Elsam is asking, why are there no time triggers in states? Very simply, the team hasn't gotten to it yet. They're trying to work on a few other things that will lead up to that, and they have a few other priorities to get to first, but that's definitely on their radar. It's something they're going to be exploring, and eventually we'll see time triggers on states, but got to tackle a few things before we get to that point. So with this, I'm going to grab an ellipse, just draw one out nice and small. That could work. And I'm going to use a repeat grid. Command and Control R to create a repeat grid. Drag this out and just bring this in a little bit. Make sure this is centered. And I'm going to drop the opacity. Just so that users know that there's something over there. They can swipe it over or they can tap on that menu to open things up. All right, now you're probably noticing when I'm playing this, it's kind of fading away, and it's because that notification is not present on that other artboard. So once I'm happy with all of this, and I can probably get away with bumping this up just a little bit more. Make sure that this is all centered really nicely. 12 pixels we'll go for. Now in this section here, I may want to pull in maybe another image from this particular Illustrator file, right? Now what I could do is dive in here and grab one of these groups, right? I can copy that, I can paste that in here, make it quite a bit smaller, right? And then, mask it. I could do that, but it would take it would take out of the resources quite a bit. You have this massive pixel design, right, in this tiny little space. Probably not what you want to do, because it'll be a resource hog, right? So what I'm going to do instead is just grab one of these. I can right click on one from the layers panel over to the left, export selected, and export it directly to my computer as a PNG or a JPEG or whatever it might be. And then if I hop over to Finder, where I already have some exported, I can just grab one of them, let's say this national park one, and pop it directly into this square. That way, it's just a simple image. It's a fairly low quality image, but it's not this massive pixel design, which are great if you need to be able to modify the layers. But in this case, it's simply an image that we need. Is there a way to fix the area text width to the actual text? Like double click for the height? No, so not yet. So I think that might be something that is in the works, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I think it is. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's actively in the works. But there's something better in the works, but I'm not going to say anything about that now. But right now, area text, if you only the height can be double clicked on to squish it in, but pretty sure. I should check my little book of secrets, but I'm pretty sure something's in the works. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm gonna make sure to go ahead and group all of these elements and call this notification and copy it and paste it over here. I can also make it, let me actually go back. bad, Howard. I'm going to actually make this into a component. So Command and Control K, and this will create our main component here, as you can see by the solid diamond to the left, right? And there we go. Now I'm going to copy this and paste it. And this is going to be an instance of that main component as indicated by the hollow diamond. And the benefit of this is if I needed to maybe change the image in this particular component, for example, I can choose, let's say this one over here. You're going to notice it also updated on that main component. So definitely use components and states and all that fun stuff when you can. And you know what? I noticed I did not include this particular menu inside of that component. So another benefit, copy it and just pop it directly into this component, and it's also going to place it here. Now, if you also decided to create maybe an additional state on this particular notification, that's also going to sync. So what I'm going to do, I have this active, I have my component. Now over here to the right within the Properties Inspector, I'm going to press that plus button and create a new state. Now, because we're working for mobile, a hover state really won't apply. You could do it if you just want to see what the interaction looks like, but realistically, you probably want to stay away from hover. Someone says the video is not playing good. Try to refresh. Sometimes that helps some sort of video problems. But it looks like on my end, we have a pretty good connection. So it might be the browser. Give it a refresh. So I'm going to press New State, and let's type in, or I can just type in menu, for example. And now I can dive in here and start making some changes to what this might look like. So maybe, for example, what would this look like? What would a menu look like? Maybe this whole thing will move over a touch. Right? Just like this. And then there might be some additional options. So maybe let's go for reply. We probably need a snooze button. Snooze, there we go. That looks like a pretty good icon. Let's go ahead and move this here. I don't know what the reply icon would do, but you know what? We're gonna run with it. All right. Maybe these are actually like, maybe it goes like this. There we go. Sometimes as you're designing, you just refresh the boop for you. Boop. All right. And then under here, we'll drag this out like that. Let's round out the corners. I think this was 16 pixels. And let's drop that a touch. I don't know where I'm going with this, but this is the fun of live designing, right? There we go. Perfect. Okay. Don't know what that is, but we're going to run with it. So that's essentially the second state, right? We've got our default state and our menu state. And if I take a look over here on this artboard, the menu state came over beautifully, right? And then of course you would go ahead and auto animate it, create a micro interaction, that fun stuff. Justin says, is there a way to replace an image that is a PSD? Is there a way to replace an image? I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to. Replace an image that is a PSD. Or are you talking about, are you dragging in a Photoshop document into like a square like this to replace one of the existing images? If that's the case, there isn't. You can't, sometimes the Photoshop files are just way too large, so I would recommend exporting it. But what you can do is on any image, you can right click and then edit in Photoshop. And then you can do whatever you need to do over there and then save it. It'll save it back as an image, but it won't be a PSD file. All right, actually another thing you can do is if you're working with Creative Cloud libraries, under the file menu, if you go down to open Creative Cloud libraries, you can save basically entire PSD files. Let me bring up, where is it? Yeah, so here's the Creative Cloud library, and from within Photoshop, you can take all of your layers and drag them directly into one of your libraries. So this one here could be basically a whole bunch of layers that came in from Photoshop, and then I can just drag this directly onto an image, just like this, and it'll replace it, right? This is probably a very large file, so it's gonna take a second or two to load in there, but hopefully that answers your question. But in terms of just grabbing a PSD file and dragging into Photoshop, you can open it in XD. You can open it in XD, but you can't replace an existing image. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so now that we have this looking pretty good, the last thing I want to do is maybe I'm going to showcase this on Dribbble, and I want to, create a little bit of a larger presentation, for example, right? So if I grab my artboard tool, I want to start by creating just a regular artboard, and I'm going to set the width at 1200 by 900, just like that. Perfect. And in the background, I might want a little bit of an image. Let's go for this hiking image. Now I do have one saved out, so I can actually just hop over to Finder, because I'm not too worried about that one having all the different layers and the paths and the groups and things like that. Although I don't need the text, but do I have another one without text? This one looks pretty good. Okay, perfect. We need more beard guy. Yes, we do. I couldn't really fit him into this, but maybe next class we'll make sure to have a beard guy. All right, so that's done. We have an artboard. I'm gonna just call this Dribbble, which again is 4x3, which is 1200 by 900. And I'm going to start by grabbing all the elements inside of the night artboard. So I'm gonna just hold down my shift key, click on the first, click on the last, copy it, and hop over here and paste it. I clearly messed something up. There we go. Now, what you're noticing is that because we have a large image as the background, it's kind of overflooding onto everything. So one thing you can do, if you know you're going to be using this on another artboard, is essentially create a mask over top of all of it. So just like that, and I'm going to mask all of these elements, mask with shape. And now if I copy and paste, there we go. That looks pretty good. And I can do the exact same thing for this one here. Drag out a rectangle. I think this was called rectangle 24. Very original, right? I'm great at layer naming. And then mask with shape and call this app. All right, and copy, duplicate, duplicate and paste. Right, there we go. And now, just like I did earlier, I'm gonna go into prototype mode, set up a time trigger from the artboard level over to the right, and here it goes. Woo! Right? Fancy. Now, of course, I may not want this to be right at the edge up here. So I'm going to just grab this, bring it in a little bit. You want to keep an eye on your area text because it might squish in a little bit. Or what you can do is you just make the artboards a little bit bigger. Just like that. That way we have a little bit of breathing room at the top and at the bottom for our application. All right, so one more thing we may want to do is, maybe in the background behind these applications as it's transitioning, maybe the background also transitions from a dusk to a daytime. So let me quickly try to do that. I'm gonna grab a rectangle, draw one out. Maybe for this, I'm gonna try to apply a gradient. Let's see what that looks like. Let's do a linear gradient. And maybe in the middle be a little bit lighter. And around the edges, it'll be a little bit darker. And we can, just like we did before, we can start experimenting with blend modes. Overlay looks okay. Soft light, hard light, that looks interesting. It also gives us a nice amount of contrast, from sort of. It'll probably be a little bit better in the other one, but it gives a little bit of contrast in there. Definitely not that one. Multiply might be a bit too much, although it's not bad. Especially if you want it to be really dusky. Let's try that. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it on this artboard here, make sure it's in the back, and just drop the opacity. And I can also do another one. Copy, paste. Let's see what a daytime version would look like. Just with tweaked colors a little bit. I probably have to go ahead and change the blend mode so it's not darker. So maybe overlay, soft light, hard light. This one's a little bit more tricky because the colors aren't really playing in my favor. Big decisions. Maybe I'll just leave it as is. All right, so now one more time, let's go ahead and click on the first artboard. Let's play this, and there it goes. There's our final presentation. And one more thing, just to satisfy me, I'm just gonna round out the corners of this mask a little bit. Let's say 32 and 32, and one more time. Fancy. And there we go. That is how you can import Illustrator files into Adobe XD, make some changes, use blend modes, and of course use Auto Animate to create a fun transition between day and night. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in today: Cornell, Cody, Umar, Umacorn, Joe, Abdukar, Justin, Philip, and everyone else that I'm probably missing. Hope you all enjoyed this. I will have a video on my YouTube channel in the not too distant future covering this as well. So if you want to take it all in a bite-sized tip, you'll be able to do that. So big thank you again. Stick around just a few minutes. Kyle T. Webster's coming up with some fantastic illustration masterclasses. Stick around, and I will see you all next time.